In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking across his grandmother's backyard in Centralia, Pennsylvania, when the ground opened beneath him. He fell into a hole venting carbon monoxide at lethal concentration. He caught a tree root and held on until his cousin pulled him out. The government's official response was to commission another study. The fire beneath that backyard had already been burning for 19 years. Welcome to the Grim Archive. Tonight's file, Centralia. The question this story asks is not how a town catches fire. It is how a town is allowed to keep burning. Centralia sits in Columbia County, Pennsylvania, in a region the anthracite industry hollowed out over a century. By the early 20th century, the mines beneath the town formed a labyrinth, hundreds of miles of tunnels, shafts, and seams threading through the hills. The coal companies extracted what they could and left the rest. When the industry declined, they left the tunnels too. By 1962, Centralia had roughly 1,100 residents, a borough council, 5 churches, and a problem no one fully understood. The ground beneath their streets was not solid. It was a ceiling. A thin ceiling over an enormous, empty dark. Memorial Day, 1962. The Centralia Borough Council authorized a cleanup. The town's landfill, an old strip mine pit at the edge of town, needed to be burned down before the holiday weekend. This was not unusual. Open burning of municipal refuse was common practice in small Pennsylvania towns at the time. A crew set the fire on May 27th. They extinguished it, or believed they had. What no one knew, what no survey confirmed, was that the pit had an opening, a connection to an abandoned mine tunnel below. The fire did not go out. It went down. The fire spread through the tunnels quietly. There were no alarms, no instruments monitoring the abandoned workings beneath Centralia. The first sign came within weeks. Locals noticed smoke rising from the ground near the pit. The borough contacted the Pennsylvania Department of Mines. Inspectors visited. A report was filed. The recommended fix was straightforward. Excavate the burning material, remove it, and smother the fire before it traveled further. The estimated cost was roughly $30,000. The borough did not have $30,000. They asked the state. The state said it was a local matter. So the fire kept moving. Between 1962 and 1969, at least 3 separate attempts were made to control the fire. Each one was partial. Each one ran out of money before completion. A trench dug in 1963 to cut off the fire's path was not dug deep enough. The fire passed beneath it. A flushing operation pumped water and incombustible slurry into the tunnels in 1965. It slowed the spread but did not stop it. By the end of the decade, the fire had moved beyond the original pit. It was now beneath residential streets. Each failed attempt had one thing in common. It was funded at a fraction of what engineers said was necessary. The full cost was always someone else's responsibility. By the early 1970s, Centralia's residents were beginning to feel the fire rather than just hear about it. Gardens that had grown for decades stopped producing. Basements registered elevated carbon monoxide. A gas station owner named John Coddington noticed his underground fuel tanks registering unusually high temperatures. The soil around them was warming from below. In 1979, officials measured a temperature of 183 degrees Fahrenheit in a borehole near the town's central business district. The fire was directly beneath Centralia now, not at its edges. Beneath the roads people drove to work, beneath the floors of homes where children slept. The jurisdictional argument had become almost formal by this point. The borough said it was a state problem. The state said federal mine reclamation funds should apply. The Federal Office of Surface Mining said the fire predated their mandate. The Bureau of Mines had studied it repeatedly but lacked authority to compel action. Each agency produced documentation. Each documentation produced a referral. Meanwhile, residents were advised to open their windows, to keep carbon monoxide detectors, when they could obtain them, in their bedrooms. Families were being told to ventilate their houses against their own ground. The paperwork moved. The fire moved faster. Then came February 1981. Todd Domboski, 12 years old, fell into the earth in his grandmother's yard on East Park Street. The hole was approximately 4 feet wide. Carbon monoxide levels inside measured at lethal concentration. He survived because a tree root held. The image of a child hanging in a steaming sinkhole in a residential backyard reached national news. For a brief moment, Centralia was not a bureaucratic file. It was a story. Congress responded. An emergency appropriation of insured study funds was approved. Study funds, not remediation, not relocation. The government's formal response to a child nearly dying in his grandmother's yard was to look more carefully at the problem. The studies confirmed what residents had known for years. The fire now occupied an estimated 3,000 feet of tunnels. Projections showed it could spread to cover an area of 1,700 acres within decades. Engineers gave a number. Extinguishing the fire at this stage would cost at minimum $660 million. The federal government offered a different number. In 1984, Congress allocated $42 million, not to fight the fire, but to relocate residents who wished to leave. The math was explicit. It was cheaper to abandon Centralia than to save it. Most residents accepted the buyout, some did not. By the early 1990s, Centralia's population had fallen from over 1,000 to fewer than 50. The Pennsylvania government condemned most of the remaining structures. Zip code 17927 was officially revoked in 2002. Route 61, the main highway through town, buckled so severely from subsurface heat and subsidence that it was closed and rerouted. The abandoned stretch became a minor landmark. Asphalt cracked and heaved, graffiti accumulating on a road that goes nowhere. A handful of residents refused to leave. Some were elderly. Some had simply decided that the government which failed to stop the fire had no authority to remove them from their homes. Courts ultimately sided with the state. The last legal holdouts were in their 80s. The fire is still burning. Geologists estimate it could continue for another 250 years, consuming the remaining coal seams at its own pace. The ground above it is unstable and laced with carbon monoxide. The borough of Centralia still technically exists. It retains its charter, but its population as of the most recent census was listed at 5. The original cost to extinguish the fire in 1962, when it was still containable, was $30,000. The total spent on studies, partial remediation attempts, and the relocation program exceeded $42 million. The fire was not unbeatable. The decision about whose job it was to beat it, that took 20 years to make. What happened in Centralia was not a natural disaster. The earth did not simply open. A decision was made on a May afternoon in 1962, a small, authorized, routine decision, and when that decision produced consequences no one anticipated, the system designed to respond could not agree on who was responsible. By the time responsibility was accepted, the window had closed. The people of Centralia spent 2 decades being told the situation was being monitored, being studied, being reviewed. They breathed the air anyway because it was home. The next story begins where another warning went ignored. The archive is always open.